Hello, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. We welcome you to today's session with Carla Peck from the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. Bonjour tout le monde. La traduction en français est disponible pour cette séance, mais Carla va faire sa présentation en anglais, mais elle peut prendre les questions en français. So you're in good hands for the rest of this session. I will just like to say that just give a little bit of introduction and background to who this wonderful person is who will be spending the next half an hour with you. Some of you may know her already. Carla is the professor of social studies and education at the University of Alberta and is the director of Thinking Historically for Canada's Future Partnership. Carla regularly works with teachers at the provincial, national, and international level and serves as a consultant on numerous boards and advisory groups for history and civic organizations. So I'm going to hand the stage now over to Carla Peck.
Thanks, Jillian. Oh, excuse me. I have a little frog in my throat to start off, so I better get rid of that right away. Hi everybody, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Comme Jillian vient de dire, je peux prendre des questions à la fin de la présentation. Je peux les prendre les questions en français si vous voulez. Je vais faire ma présentation en anglais parce que la traduction, je pense qu'elle fonctionne mieux quand je change pas de langue. Hi, everybody. I am going to be giving my presentation in English, but we'll take questions in French at the end. Thank you, Jillian, for the lovely introduction, and thank you, everybody, for coming to my presentation today. Really, this is an invitation to dialogue and an invitation for you to participate in what I perhaps very selfishly think is a really exciting opportunity and a really exciting project that I have the privilege of leading, but I'm certainly not working on it alone. So I have a brief PowerPoint. I'm just going to get that going now, and then we'll be off. Okay. So the project is called Thinking Historically for Canada's Future, or Penser Historiquement pour l'avenir du Canada. And it is a 7-year project. We received our funding in 2019, and it's a 7-year project funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. For $2.5 million, and then we received a little more than $6 million from our partner organizations. And I'll say a bit more about those partners in a moment. We have 27 professors from 17 different universities from across the country working on the project together. And then we have 31 partner organizations, and these are mostly social studies teacher organizations from across the country, and then also history and heritage organizations such as museums as well. And here you can see a snapshot on the right-hand side of the screen from our website, and on the left-hand side of the screen you can see a list of some of our other partners. We're still collecting some logos for our website, but you can see the wide range of partners that we have, and we're delighted to be able to partner with all of these tremendous organizations, many of which have members probably in this audience right now. So it's great to have you here, and it's great to be in partnership with you and your organizations on this initiative. So I want to just provide a brief overview of the goals and objectives of our project. It's because it's such a large and lengthy project, we wanted to make sure we had some clear goals from the outset. And we started from the premise that there has not been a national level study of the state of history education in Canada since 1968. That's 1 year before I was born. And that means that we don't really know, except for anecdotally, what's happening in history education across the country. And so our goal is to try and respond to that gap or that lack of evidence, and in order to map the terrain of history education from kindergarten to grade 12. And in that mapping process, we want to determine the extent to which history and social studies teaching help students engage with the key issues or problems that are facing Canadian society today. Problems that, as social studies educators, I'm sure I don't need to provide examples, but some ready examples certainly come to mind, like COVID-19. That is a pressing issue of the day. How can social studies and history teaching help us understand that? What about commemoration controversies, which are a regular conversation now, it seems, in Canadian society, whether it's about statues or school buildings or other types of buildings. So how can history and social studies teaching and learning help students grapple with, an issue like that? And I'm sure you can think of many more. We also want to identify and develop evidence-based practices in history teaching, learning, assessment, and resource development, and evaluate their efficacy in providing powerful and engaging learning experiences for students, particularly in terms of building trans-systemic understandings across knowledge systems. And we're going to say a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but what I mean by trans-systemic knowledge systems. But the idea here is, given that we haven't had a national level study of history education since 1968, and lots has changed in history education in terms of a growing body of research on how we know students learn in history and what are best pedagogical practices in teaching in history. We don't have a good sense of how those changes, even pedagogy through research or curriculum changes. Curriculum have changed a lot over the years. And we don't actually know, in terms of having a strong evidence base, of how those changes have trickled down into the classroom and how they're playing out in the classroom. We have some anecdotal evidence, we have some observational evidence, and we have some small scale studies where somebody has gone in and observed a teacher in one classroom or maybe a couple of different classrooms. But we don't have a good sense of what's happening across the whole country, or in a wide variety of contexts as well. So what does it mean to be an elementary school teacher who was trained as a generalist teacher and maybe has 1 or 2 courses in social studies education where only a part of that course was focused on teaching history? What does that look like? What does it mean to be somebody with a master's in history who is teaching history? How does that shape and determine what's happening in the classroom? What does it mean to be teaching in a French immersion context, or in a Francophone school, or an Indigenous community school? What about how the range of diversity in our classrooms is affecting and moderating how teachers are teaching history in their classes and to their students? So these are all questions that we don't have really good answers to, and not a good solid evidence base on. So we want to, as I say, identify and develop practices, assessment practices, resource development, teaching and learning, and so on, and understand what makes these practices effective, or if they're not effective, why not? Another one of our goals is working with pre-service and in-service teachers in order to cultivate communities of practice that are grounded in theoretical and empirical research on history, education, pedagogy, pedagogies that promote engaged and critical historical thinking. So we talk about this work in terms of boundary crossing or boundary work. So what would it mean for the professional learning of teachers and historians and teacher education specialists if they came together to talk with one another, to build a community of practice around history education, rather than operating in silos. So that's an exciting project that we're looking forward to getting started. And then, of course, with all of this research, we want to be able to use the findings to make evidence-based policy recommendations for curriculum, for pedagogy, for assessment, connections with ministries of education, museum educators, all these sorts of groups, because it's one thing to sort of promote ideas around teaching history, but it's another thing to be able to say, here's some research evidence to support the recommendations that we're making. So those are our 5 central goals. Now, I mentioned trans-systemic knowledge systems, and so I'm going to talk about that on this slide. We have 3 research themes and 3 threads that run through the research. And the threads are represented by the arrows here. Phase 1, which is mapping the terrain of history education, is happening now. We're in that phase now, and that's going to last until about 2021, 2022. There's always a little bit of wiggle room with timelines, and of course, COVID has thrown a bit of a wrench into things, but we're making it work. Phase 2 of the study is focusing in on knowledge creation and innovations, and that's part of what I was talking about a moment ago. And that will start around 2022 or 23. There may be some overlap with work finishing up in phase 1. Then the project is scheduled to conclude around 2026. So we've organized our research into 3 themes: curriculum and resources, pedagogy, and teacher education. And when we're looking at each of those themes, we're looking at them through sort of 3 threads that are running through them. So the first thread is historical thinking. So we're looking at curriculum. We're also looking at things like authorized textbooks, and asking questions around how does historical thinking as a way of thinking about teaching history, as a framework for teaching history, does it show up in curriculum and resources at all? If it does, how is it articulated? What does it look like? And, you know, being able to get a sense of how widespread the notion of historical thinking is in curriculum and resources across the country, or is it just kind of scattered here and there, and then is it taken up consistently or in very different ways from province to province or territory? And then the same thing through pedagogy, and then the same thing through teacher education. So the pedagogy theme, the one that's in the middle there, that's really asking questions about teaching and learning. And so that's when we're going to be in classrooms, working with teachers, working with students and so on, and looking at how historical thinking gets taken up in classroom practice. And then with teacher education, we're looking at how teachers are prepared to teach historical thinking as a historical thinking pedagogy. And we're going to be looking at teacher education programs, so the kind of coursework that students do, but also we're going to be looking at professional development opportunities that teachers have access to get a sense of what kind of opportunities are there around historical thinking, and what do those opportunities entail? What are they doing around historical thinking? The second thread is Indigenous Knowledges, and this became a major emphasis in our work, thinking about the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the importance that was placed on education, and especially revising the social studies and history curricula in those calls to actions to make sure that they more accurately reflected histories of Indigenous peoples across Canada. But also Indigenous Knowledges, we're taking it up as trying to understand how Indigenous knowledges and perspectives on history, which are or may be different from Western perspectives on history, how we can try and cross a bridge or build a bridge between those two perspectives to see what we can learn and how Indigenous knowledges can actually inform what we're doing in history education, rather than having it be something that is separate or detached from, or just added into as a bit of an add-on to a Western sort of based history curriculum. So one quick example would be notions about time. In a Western lens, time is linear and one thing happens after the other. But in Indigenous knowledges perspective, time is much more circular and the past is never really past. So that's just one quick example of what we might learn from Indigenous knowledge systems, which have, up until now been very marginalized, if not completely excluded from curricula. How can we build a bridge between those two knowledge systems? And again, we're doing that when we're looking at curriculum and resources, when we're looking at pedagogy, and when we're looking at teacher education. The last thread is civic engagement. And as most, if not all of you will know, one of the main rationales for teaching history and social studies has been the development of good citizens, strong citizens, active citizens. But we really don't have any solid evidence that demonstrates that teaching history in any particular way, or teaching history, just more history, how does that actually connect to civic engagement? We have some sense from social studies research and civic engagement research that if students are engaged in just informed discussions and have debates and an open classroom climate, that has gives some signals to how they might participate in society. But we don't have a really good sense of how history teaching and learning can contribute to civic engagement, even though it makes good common sense that if somebody has more historical knowledge, they should have more knowledge of their society and then therefore be better able to engage in their society. But having a sense of that and having evidence are two different things. And so we're trying to figure out how can we make those connections between history and civic engagement as well. And again, we're looking at that in each of the three themes. So hopefully that makes sense. Right, as I said, right now we're in phase one. This gives a little bit of an overview of the work that is currently underway. We are in the curriculum and resources theme. We're conducting literature reviews to see what's already been done in Canada and elsewhere. We're developing an analysis tool so that when we sit down to look at curricula and resources, that we have a framework that we can use to analyze them. We're in the process of collecting and analyzing curricula and textbooks. And there will be some questions on our teacher survey that I'll be talking about more in a moment, related to curriculum and resources and their use by teachers. In the teaching and learning, or the pedagogy theme, again, we're doing literature reviews just to confirm what we know about what's already been done. And a large percentage of the questions on the teacher survey are related to teaching and learning practices in the classroom. We're going to be following that survey with what we're calling portraits of professional practice, because a survey, while a very powerful tool for being able to collect a large amount of data from a large amount of people, at a certain point, it's kind of surface data because it doesn't get into the why questions. And so with these portraits of professional practice, which will be done in different parts of the country, in different school contexts, and with people with different kinds of expertise and experience, we hope to put a little meat on the bones of, if you like, of the survey and get into some more depth to be able to say, with some more confidence about what's happening in schools. And by no means will 25 or 30 portraits of professional practice, we can't say, well, that's what every teacher does, but it will give us a sense of what's happening in different contexts. We're also beginning the process of developing a student survey about their teaching and learning experience, or their learning experiences and their experiences of their teachers' teaching related to history. Last but not least, the teacher education theme. We are analyzing Bachelor of Education university requirements and social studies and history pedagogy courses to see what they have to say around those three themes and the three threads. We're looking at in-service professional learning opportunities for teachers that are currently in the field. There are a few questions on our survey related to teacher education, which broadly includes initial teacher education, but also continued professional learning. And we will soon be getting ready to do some interviews with key informants at teacher education programs across the country to better understand why they have the requirements that they do and where they see gaps and what they see as strengths and that sort of thing. And of course, as I've mentioned now a couple of times, historical thinking, Indigenous knowledges, and civic engagement run through all of these themes. So you can see that there's lots keeping us busy. Now, phase two, I'll just say very quickly because I'm mindful of time. Phase two is going to be about innovations. And really, we don't have anything really set in stone at this point because phase two is going to depend a large part on what we find in phase one. I know that we are going to encounter amazing teaching and learning experiences when we get out talking with teachers and students. And so phase two will allow us to do an even deeper dive into those and to see, well, why, what is it that makes this particular learning experience so powerful for students? Or how did this teacher become such an expert in doing what they do? So we're really excited about phase two as well, because it's going to allow us to really highlight some powerful things that are already happening in classrooms and that we know are happening, but we want to be able to document. Members of the research team and some of our partners might also want to create some innovations that they want to try out in the classrooms, or maybe in some museum contexts as well. If we can ever get back going to museums again in person, or online for that matter. And so there'll be an opportunity to come up with some innovations and test those out as well. So, how can you get involved in phase one? Well, right away, I want to ask you to watch out for information about our teacher survey and ask you to fill it out and to encourage your colleagues to do the survey too. The survey is for K-12 teachers in any school context in the country, and it's for anybody who teaches history. This includes history in the context of social studies. It could be a gender studies course that has a history component. It could be anybody that does teaching of history in some way in their courses that they're teaching. And I'm particularly mindful, as a former elementary school teacher, I know not a lot of elementary school teachers think of themselves as subject specialists, but of course elementary teachers do teach social studies. So I want to make sure that we get to hear their voices as well. And we're looking for, 2,000 to 3,000 people to fill this out. So, and if we get more, even better. So that should be coming, I'm going to say around the next month or so. And I want to make sure that we get it out. If we can get it out before December comes, of course, that would be good, because as a former teacher, I remember what December gets like. And gets very busy, but it's coming very soon. And so I just ask that you keep your eyes out for it. All of our social studies partner organizations have agreed to share the information with their members. And then if you can forward that on to people who may not be members in the organization, that would be really awesome. Other ways to get involved would be being willing to volunteer for being one of the portraits of professional practice. Your identities would always be anonymous. We wouldn't like put up photos or anything of you. It would be done through an ethical research approach. But it would be great to have as diverse a range of experiences as possible to be able to really try and paint a very rich and textured picture of what's happening across the country in history education. There will be opportunities for you to assist your association with consulting and providing feedback on partnership activities. So for example, when we have a draft of our student survey, we will be sending it out to partners for feedback, and we will be relying on our partners' expertise and knowledge and groundedness in the classroom to be able to make sure that the questions are the right questions to be asking. Because the data will be available to partner organizations. And so we want to make sure that we're fulfilling their needs and your needs. As I mentioned, phase 2 projects will focus on innovation. So there's huge potential for your involvement there. I know that's a few years down the road, but just kind of plant that seed. And then, of course, I would love it if you would spread the word about our project to your colleagues, because another sort of overarching goal, as we have all these public debates about different things that are history related, is that we want to make sure that those conversations are as informed as possible and not sort of flying off the top of one's head, but, having good solid information and evidence-based information that we can contribute to those conversations. So if you can spread the word about this, that would be great. Now, the why question, why should you get involved? Well, as I mentioned, there hasn't been a systematic pan-Canadian study on K-12 history education in 52 years. And there is huge potential here for you to have a role in shaping curriculum, pedagogy, resource development, and teacher education by participating in this research, because by contributing your ideas, by contributing your voices, that's how we're going to learn what's going well, what needs to be strengthened, what kind of supports teachers need, what kind of supports do students need, and then we can use that evidence, and our partner organizations can use that evidence, which is the next point here on the slide, to actually advocate for the kinds of things that teachers say are needed in the classroom in order to be able to do their job well and for the benefit of students. And advocate for professional learning opportunities, for certain kinds of materials or resources that you need. Time for professional development maybe will come up as something that's hugely important. Well, if we have lots of data and evidence about this, then we're in a better position to advocate, and your partners' representatives are in a better position to advocate on your behalf. So I don't know how many of you got to see Hamilton in person. I didn't, but I did get to see the televised version when the pandemic began. And so I'm borrowing from the musical Hamilton and asking you or imploring you, begging you not to miss your shot to have a chance to get involved in this really once in a generation initiative. I would love to have you involved, and I think it's an exciting time to be involved in history education, and we need your voices. We need your voices to make sure that we can continue the good work that's happening across the country. And with that, that's just a quick shot of my the project website, thinking-historically.ca, which is also available in French. And with that, I will end and invite questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carla. We had one question about what is your plan to put the findings and recommendations into practice? And I'm sure it's an extensive plan. but we are closing in on our half an hour. We have 1 minute. So I think we see your contact information on the slide here, and you're encouraging everyone to reach out. This is a very important study, and I think I realize its importance, and I'm not even in education. So everyone, we encourage you to reach out to Carla and add your input and participate in the upcoming survey. Thank you so much, Carla, for your time and participating in this conference. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you. And I don't know, I can briefly answer until we get kicked off, I guess. I apologize for taking more time than I thought I was going to take. Really, the plans will be in that stage 2 or phase 2 is to try and map out what those innovations look like and their strengths and weaknesses. But then it will be working with our partners, including museums, ministries of education, and so on, to really try and clearly communicate what the findings say and suggest about what's needed, and then advocate for that, support our partners as they advocate for that. And who knows, maybe there's another grant application in the future to actually take the next step, right, and do that implementation process as well. And somebody else might do that.
Build on the research, right? Once it's documented. Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for everyone who came. We'll end the session now. Have a great day, Carla, and everyone else.